80 years ago today, the world changed forever. For the first time, an atomic bomb was used in warfare when the U.S. Army dropped the harmless-sounding little boy over the city of Hiroshima, causing unprecedented death and destruction. Today, survivors took part in the commemorations. Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba laid flowers to pay tribute to the victims. A minute's silence was held at the exact hour when the bomb fell in 1945, killing tens of thousands of people.
Hiroshima. Before it and the world changed forever. Over 120,000 men, women, and children lost their lives when 2 U.S.-made atomic bombs destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Today, Hiroshima's Peace Memorial is a perpetual ruin, intended to keep the memory of nuclear weaponry's destructive fury alive.
It's horrible to see that all those people were bombed and hear all these stories, and we have to do something about it. If we remain silent, it might happen again.
But 80 years on, has the world learned the lessons of Hiroshima? The number of nuclear weapons peaked during the Cold War. It's been decreasing thanks to disarmament agreements between Russia and the United States. A good start, according to observers. But the picture isn't so simple. There are more nuclear powers now than ever before, 9 in total, with stockpiles estimated to top over 12,000 warheads. Most of them are in Russia and the United States. All major nuclear powers are currently modernizing their arsenals, expanding their destructive capability.
The weapon that destroyed Hiroshima back in 1945 had a yield of about 15 kiloton. So by today's standard, that weapon would be considered a low-yield warhead, even though it destroyed an entire city. But today, most weapons typically have yields in several hundred of kilotons.
New delivery systems like Russia's plane-launched hypersonic Kinzhal missile can deliver nuclear payloads in minutes around the globe. Nuclear powers are also pulling out of treaties limiting the spread of atomic weapons, and countries like Russia, China, or the United States, with its proposed Golden Dome system, are considering placing weapons in space for the first time, or incorporating AI technology into their defensive systems.
I think we're considerably less safe now than we were when the Cold War was ending in 1990, 1991. Beneath the headlines of the nuclear weapons reduction that has been going on over the years, in recent years, we've started to see an uptick in the number of operational nuclear warheads, and we're seeing the introduction of new technologies which are taking us into a new arms race.
And with military flare-ups between nuclear-armed powers like India or Pakistan becoming more common, and the looming disruption climate change is likely to cause, experts have a message for voters.
Show interest, get informed, be talking with other people, be talking about it, be part of creating a political climate in which political leadership that takes us towards disarmament is valued. That's something that everybody can do. Everybody has a stake in this, and everybody has a part to play in it.
To help leave the horrors inflicted on Hiroshima squarely in the past.
Let's dig deeper and bring in Rebecca Eleanor Johnson. She's an expert on nuclear disarmament and a member of the steering group of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. Welcome, Rebecca. It's great to have you on the show. Now, 80 years after Hiroshima, we're entering what many are calling the third nuclear age. Are we forgetting the lessons of Hiroshima and Nagasaki?
We must not forget the lessons of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They teach us just how horrendous 2 relatively small by nowadays standards nuclear weapons can actually be, landing on any place in the world, any city. We have to listen to what the survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and of nuclear testing have told us about the horrors of nuclear weapons and their long-term, as well as, heat and blast and short-term and radiation impacts. We must not forget. That is why the Hibakusha keeps saying, never again.
Yeah. Still, there has been a lot of nuclear saber rattling, particularly in recent months. How close are we to nuclear war in comparison to the previous nuclear age during the Cold War?
Well, we got very close to nuclear war, actually, during the Cold War. I think we have to understand that. But what we need to understand now is that there are still 11,000 nuclear weapons, and they're in the hands of 9 countries, which means 9 leaders can, particularly if they talk about tactical nuclear weapons, when we know that any use of nuclear weapons can launch, any detonation can launch nuclear war by intention, by miscalculation, as indeed I think Putin essentially miscalculated that he had a deterrent in his nuclear arsenal when he launched the invasion of Ukraine, and also by mistake. And there have been a lot of mistakes involving both human and electronic error. Anything like that can launch a nuclear weapon, and as we now know from the studies, that can lead inexorably, perhaps, to a nuclear, what they might call an exchange, but it is a nuclear war, and that itself can go global within minutes.
Now, you mentioned we have 9 countries that have nuclear weapons. It's a multipolar nuclear order in a way. And we're seeing all of these countries modernizing their arsenals. We're also seeing emerging nuclear ambitions in other countries. Why is that?
Well, I think we have to understand that Putin's invasion as a nuclear-armed state against Ukraine, which had nuclear weapons on its soil until the end of the Cold War and had voluntarily joined the Non-Proliferation Treaty, that has made a lot of people around the world think, wrongly I believe, but think that only nuclear weapons can help them to deter such an attack by a nuclear-armed state. Now, actually, far from deterrence, what we see nuclear weapons really doing is providing the 9 nuclear leaders, if you like, many of whom are extremely irresponsible, most, I would say, looking at what they're doing these days, to believe that they have a deterrent that actually means they think they have freedom of action to behave militarily with impunity. And we see that happening in a number of places around the world. This is, again, why the hibakusha from Hiroshima and Nagasaki and why the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons work together all around the world to bring about the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, to reinforce a previous 1960s treaty that is still in force, by the way, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, but which needs, both treaties together need to be taken much more seriously because they demand not just non-proliferation, which is being violated by all of the 9 nuclear-armed states now, but also nuclear disarmament. And that has to take steps as rapidly, as sensibly, as rationally as possible. And we need the treaties to help that happen.
I want to pick up on something that you mentioned at the very beginning. Fewer Hiroshima survivors remain to share their stories. What can be done to keep remembering that tragedy and shape our present and future with the memory of what happened 80 years ago, keep that memory alive, and have that shape our responsibility towards the future and, generations to come?
I went to Hiroshima and Nagasaki in the early 1980s. It changed my life when I really understood what nuclear weapons do. They don't do deterrence. They do blast and fires and uncontrollable dispersal of radiation, mass death, mass weapon, mass destruction. That's what they really do. That's the message from the younger generation, the children, the grandchildren of not just Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but of the nuclear test sites, from Kazakhstan to the Pacific to the United States. These are the people now taking the stories forward, and we need the scientists and the doctors and ICANN as civil society. We need to carry on working together to explain why there are no safe hands for nuclear weapons. We cannot risk a nuclear war being launched by one of the crazy leaders, or by mistake, or by cyber attack, or by miscalculation.
That was nuclear disarmament campaigner Rebecca Johnson. Thank you so much for your time. Keep up the good fight. Juliane Hauschulz is the nuclear disarmament advisor for the IPPNW Germany, a global organization which aims to build a nuclear-free world. Juliane, welcome to DW. Now, the world has not seen a nuclear attack since Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Does that show humanity has learned from history in this case?
I guess a little bit at least. However, we will still not be able to help, for example, after a nuclear strike. So in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, there was no humanitarian aid for the survivors. And today there would be no humanitarian aid neither. And regarding this fact, as an organization of doctors, it is very important for us to say that we need to prevent all of this. And therefore we need to abolish nuclear weapons. And in this regard, no, the world has learned nothing from it.
What would a nuclear-free world look like? What would happen to all the weapons that exist now?
Well, they would be basically taken into parts, and then the parts can be, they can be put in other weapons, for example, or you can kind of recycle some of the parts. You would need to store some of the materials, especially, of course, the radioactive materials. That's the whole question of how to store nuclear materials in a way that would be safe for generations to come. So we all have this problem as well. However, I personally think that all these questions that are discussed right now in international fora, they are it is worth discussing them, because we should really aim to get into that world where we find solutions for these questions, where we abolish nuclear weapons, and where we are safe from the destruction that these weapons would mean to the world.
What about the argument, though, that nuclear weapons deter war? Let's look at Ukraine, for example. If they had kept their nuclear weapons, would they have been invaded by Russia?
Well, first, with this argument, the first problem with it is that Ukraine never had its own nuclear weapons. It was Soviet nuclear weapons. They never had the control of it. And even prior, before the Soviet Union failed, they declared themselves a nuclear-free state because they wanted to get rid of the old Soviet nuclear system. So this is also part of history. However, the argument behind it being that deterrence works, basically, I have some problems with that argument as well, because we see, for example, or we have seen in May, the armed conflict between Pakistan and India. Both are nuclear-armed states. So apparently war cannot be prevented by nuclear weapons. And there can also not be peace with nuclear weapons.
Right, just the threat and the memory of the destruction from 1945 can avoid these weapons of being used again, and then maybe avoid an escalation of a war like we saw between India and Pakistan, because escalation was largely avoided.
Well, but we also see in history that it was often only luck that avoided a nuclear strike, or the decision of an individual person that decided against, for example, launching a first strike. So we also see that luck has been a huge part of nuclear history, and the IPPNW think that luck can never be a security strategy.
U.S. President Donald Trump has said it would be great, and I'm quoting him here, if everybody would get rid of their nuclear weapons. He's also talked about holding denuclearization talks with Russia and China. If the U.S. president supports the idea, what are the biggest obstacles to a nuclear-free world right now, then?
I think it is the missing trust between the parties and the question of whether Russia, China, and the US, for example, should have talks all with each other, or whether it's only Russia and the US first. So there are some questions that are discussed at the moment. And I think that, for example, the New START treaty, it is a treaty between Russia and the US. And it will end in 2026, so next year. And I think that would be a good start to renegotiate this treaty, for example, to rebuild this trust, to have these talks, and then to talk with China about another treaty. So we need these little steps, I would say. So step by step, we can come into a world where nuclear arms control is a normality again.
That was
But
Juliane
I think
Hauschulz.
this missing trust at the moment.
Thank you so much. That was Juliane Hauschulz from International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War. Great to get your insights today.
Thank you.